The necessary witness. I brought the mirror home because it was heavy and stubborn and had no reason to be left in a house that felt like a held breath after an argument. The estate sale on Currant Street had been going since morning. A slow procession of people who knew the dead woman's roses and the tightness of her handshake and were polite about the bedroom. I was there for a lamp, something with a shade that would make the corner by my window a place where I could read in a good yellow pool. I left with the mirror because of the foxing, those pale moons where the silver had given itself back to air, and because the acanthus leaves of the frame had been rubbed down by time until they looked softened by handling, not carved. Lemon oil and attic dust, the smell of other people's carefulness. The hall in my place is narrow, a proper little throat between living room and bedroom with a runner I bought at a yard sale from a woman who refused to let me leave without also taking a pile of dish towels. "They're clean," she'd said, which was true enough then. The baseboards are scuffed from the time I dragged the coat stand without lifting it, a noise like chalk. I hung the mirror on 2 screw eyes at the end of that hall, level with the doorknob to the bedroom, and stepped back to see what I'd done. Glass is simple. It says what is. The lead-backed kind says what was and is trying to return to that. You look and it looks back. I looked. The hallway came back to me, baseboard scuffs, the little smudge where my shoulder touches when I pass half asleep to the kettle at night, the brass doorknob with a tiny nick at 2 o'clock like a star. My sleeve, lifted to move hair from my face, left no trace. My pulse jumped in my throat and didn't move the air in the glass. I raised both hands and the mirror gave me nothing but the hall. I checked angle and light the way you check your own breath after a climb. I tilted the frame a little, stood to the left, the right. I wiped a corner with the edge of my shirt and made a clear square inside the foxing, a window inside a window, and saw the same, the hall minus me. I went to the front room and dragged the coat stand down the hall backward, the 3-legged thing scuffing its own slow letter S along the runner as if leaving a signature. I set it behind me and stood again in front of the mirror. My face arrived at once, paling into the glass as if developed in solution. The foxed parts broke my skin into all the ways a person fails themselves. But there I was, there the collar of my shirt, there the troubling mole near the ear I mean to have looked at. I backed the coat stand away, faint, then gone. I returned it, there. The mirror wanted a witness, and it was not me. I tried other things because the mind instructed by afternoon's tinkering will tell you to try a broom balanced, a ladder unfolded, the stiff-backed chair. I leaned the broom at an angle and watched myself flicker and disappear and return like a nervous light. The ladder did worse. It brought me up as a ghost, a pale oval, a suggestion of eyes, and then let me go when the ladder's aluminum flexed against the floor. The chair gave me nothing. I learned the rules by touching them. Only things that stood, legs down, their own weight on the floor with no opinion, would bring me up. The cat weaving my ankles didn't count. The mirror refused pets and props. It wanted something with feet set the way a person stands when there is a photo they do not have time to agree to. I left the coat stand in place a week and used the glass for small work, taming a collar, making a good part with a comb when I had an appointment at the credit union. Finding paint near the hairline from the afternoon, I finished the bedroom window frame and left my hand there as long as it took to learn the sensation of being generous. Every time I moved past, a little flicker, on, off, on, if my footfalls troubled the stand. I caught my face in fragments and felt like a person whose house had a multiple-choice test with only one answer picked. One night sweeping, I carried the stand to the front room because I was tired of the way its 3 legs sat like a spider in the hall corner. I propped it in the bay window and forgot. The night felt like all the other nights, refrigerator humming the sound of a well-rehearsed thought traffic light at Pike and Wren, flicking its cycle with such discipline you could set intention by it if you were a person who needed someone else's idea of time to manage your own. On my way to bed, I passed the mirror and saw myself plain and whole, the hall behind me empty. I did not turn. I stepped sideways, slow. My reflection blinked out, then back, as if something had stepped and matched me in the narrow drafts that homes with high ceilings keep under their clothes. I stood until calves shook and the towel on the oven handle felt too polite. The air behind my neck cooled, a narrow, faithful draft like an open closet. The mirror kept me only while something else stood where I have never permitted anything to stand. When it moved, or when I did, I thinned to wallpaper. In the morning, 2 shallow ovals pressed the runner where nothing had stood. I pushed down on the places with my thumb, as if to prove the runner had gone soft there. It was the runner doing what materials do, not a handprint in a pie. But all day, the shadows of those ovals came and went like small bruises on a fruit. I stepped around them as if they were sleeping. It was a simple place I live in, clean enough when I deserved it. The refrigerator came with it. The kind of rectangular machine that never wants you to know it is working. I keep a mug by the sink. I rinse it out at night and turn it upside down on a dish towel, one of the woman S from the yard sale. And in the morning I pour coffee and forget the towel ever did anything loyal. The mug leaves a ring on the counter when I set it down, and it is a private point of pride that I wipe that ring immediately. Each day should not owe for yesterday. My name is Rowan. The bank writes my first name plain as a receipt, and I work in a warehouse that used to be a cannery before the river took itself away and left aluminum in our mouths. We ship hardware now, boxes of screws and hinges and heavy-bottomed handles, the new weight of the town. I spend hours with a hand scanner so close to my palm it is nearly a fact of my skin. The barcode beep nesting in the day, the way a bird builds in a gutter and keeps you company at night whether you wanted it or not. At work that week, there were notices taped to the punch clock, typed without a spell check because the man in the office pretends to loathe small machines. Rolling blackouts possible due to substation maintenance. Boil water advisory through Friday. Use bottled for coffee. Management thanks you for your patience. Out of an abundance. Someone had underlined the last phrase with a pen that didn't want to do it. The break room smelled like old coffee and lemon degreaser, and the kind of bread grown under fluorescent lights. When the blackouts hit, they did it politely. The lights wavered, the scanner threw up a tiny error code, and then blinked back into goodwill. The conveyor belt sulked for a minute and did their job. The compressor behind the cooler made a click I could hear in my molars. We kept going because the boxes would still need to be packed when the station came back. And I've seen a pallet of unsent things hurt a man, his view of himself worse than a bad haircut. At home, the mirror kept its rules like a country that does not speak to its neighbors. If I leaned the coat stand behind me, my face had edges. If I took it away, I disappeared. If I set the coat stand to the left, the mirror accepted me faintly, with the wrongness of a face caught at the corner of frame in a photograph of a family I could never belong to. I began to log it, not because I believed the logging would result in anything, but because writing numbers in a notebook lulls a mind into thinking it has mastered its own air. 7:13 a.m., coat stand 18, back, reflection, full pale. 7:14, stand moved, 12 left. Reflection, partial, eyes and hair only. 8:30 p.m., stand in bedroom, no reflection, draft present, ovals on runner faint, location unchanged. I didn't tell anyone. The sentence would be impossible to place in a mouth and have it sound like any person you could bear to be near. The warehouse men liked me because I didn't TO them chat, and because I put my name on a schedule when they needed someone to do the early shift and turn on the light by hand in the stairwell and listen for raccoons. I am 38, which is not old enough to have stories that call witnesses, and too old to go out of my way on a weeknight for a thing that looks like a man's excuse. On Wednesday, the mirror did what a device does when it begins to suspect it will be humoured. It sharpened its terms. I had been moving a ladder and a broom, and the coat stand back and forth until I felt the hallway judging me. I stood with my back to the mirror and scooted the coat stand an inch with my heel, and the draft lifted the hair on my neck. I did not move. The fridge made a sound people call a sigh when they want their machines to be friends. At that moment, on the glass, I saw my own shoulder move a fraction, and then it didn't belong to me. In the mirror behind me, something had stepped into my space and matched me, and my face in the glass went flatter, as if the light had tired of my bones. I did not turn. Turning is one kind of cowardice, and I have a different kind. I took one step to the side. The mirror let me go like a teacher who preferred another child. I stood until the calves shook again and made the bad decision to try to think my way out. I called it witness because I needed a word. It was not a protector. Its presence owned no old story I could stand in and say, I have done this, I have felt that. It was not company. If it had a face, I never met it. It was a condition. Stand still and be looked at. Move and be rubbed out. I tried the little science I have been taught by people who make a living in basements with long tables and small lamps. Angle of incidence equals angle of reflection, which is the infant sentence anyone would bring. But this was not angle. This was presence. Mass, maybe. Proximity. I taped lines of painter S tape on the floor behind me to mark where the stand had to be, where the ladder worked better than the broom, where nothing worked at all. I tried a laser level I had from the shelf project on the sunniest window. The red line behaved. The mirror behaved like a person being tested on a story it refuses to tell. I took off the back, carefully, because foil and paint on a soft wood whine when you ask them to look at you. Lead-backed, like the old men at the shop said when they wanted to talk about history and lawsuits. The silvering looked healthy. The glass looked like the inside of a cloud. In the stairwell, the light buzzed in a key that made the jawbones answer. I could smell someone else's soap, a faint medical suite. The pipes made hose water sound, a suppressed gush every time the couple on the second floor did anything together. I learned to hear when the neighbor had decided to be vigorous with his brush, when he had given up, when he had turned their sink into a version of their sink from 2 years ago because a man will not admit to replacing it. I felt the building's throat when I passed the first landing. I could run my fingers along the paint that covers a pinhole in the plaster and feel the little ring of hardened breath. I hung a towel Rowan straight on the oven handle as counterweight to everything. I wrote the things I needed to do on the back of old receipts and slid them under the little ceramic house on the kitchen counter that once held matches. I bought bottled water at the grocery, and the barcode beeps were bold and unashamed, and I liked them because they didn't need me. The cashier slid my change across the counter instead of putting it in my hand, because the system makes little men of us all. The fridge weighed its warm gone cold, the compressor clicking into a hum that had found the perfect pitch to sit under speech. It was a machine that did not want to be named, which is the noblest thing a machine can be. I stopped sleeping in the bedroom because the bedroom had a door near the mirror, and I have learned that if a person chooses to sleep near a door, the door will at some point choose. I dragged blankets to the living room. The coat stand looked stupid where I put it in the bay window, long legs bent like an insect resting. At 1, the lights went down for 20 minutes, then returned. At 3, they did it again. I drank tap water, boiled, and felt like a pilgrim who has settled for half of God's attention. I had one good bite of toast. I picked up the cat and apologized for every day I'd used her as a list of excuses. I texted my sister because all my years of not texting her will never make me a person who does not have her number in her phone. The draft at the back of my neck made me write, "You won to believe the thing my mirror wants." I deleted it. I wrote, "How are you?" I deleted it. I wrote nothing to anyone. I held the phone until it got hot and then put it face down, as if I'd done something private that required a priest. I bought a cheap tripod for the little camera I used to set on my desk when I talked to clients from other towns, back when other towns wrote to ours to say they wanted our handles and hinges and our careful boxes and our men with their good shoulders. I set the camera to record the hall overnight. I moved the coat stand out of the frame because I wanted to know whether the camera could be a stand in the way a chair could not. I went to the living room and lay sleeplessly like a person practicing to be a different person. In the morning, I watched the footage at double speed and saw nothing except the grey churn of the lamps and the brief half-appearance of my own arm when I walked through with a cup. In the instant where I glanced into the glass and saw my shoulder meet the ghost, my necessary witness, my condition, the camera ate me. The clip showed the hall, the baseboard scuffs, the brass doorknob, the runner, and nothing that would make a body think there had been a body there. I took a photograph in front of the mirror with the coat stand behind me and the phone in my hand. The mirror shows the mirrored, and the phone shows the mirror, that stupid old trick, and the picture came out like a diagram of a lie. The hall empty, but for the coat stand and me as a smudge at the edge of where I had stood. I printed the image at the pharmacy to make it real enough to argue with. The man at the counter slid it under to me with a look like he didn't want to see whatever had happened between me and my household. The barcode machine beeped twice by mistake and made the woman in line behind me say, "Huh?" in the way a person says, "huh," when they want to be near you and away from you at once. The door chimed and the bell, S-pitch, fell a half tone as if the store knew I would spend part of the day making a sheet of paper into a court. I took my photograph home and put it under the magnet, shaped like a lighthouse, because nothing must be without a guardian. The lighthouse, tipped to the right from a drop in a previous apartment, makes a small wind out of the kitchen noises. The photograph curled at the corner overnight. In the morning, I put my palm on it to make it flatter. My hand left a fog mark that meant I was alive that day. On Friday, the mirror became bolder, or I did. I stood there with the coat stand behind me because I wanted to comb the part in my hair as a person in a city with appointments does. My face arrived. I let the comb rest on my shoulder and regarded my skin the way a man regards wood before he makes a cut. The way you hold something honorable in your mind so as to do it less harm. The draft behind me quickened. It might have been nothing. We are too generous with the word nothing in these apartments. In the corner of the glass, where foxing had a color almost like sugar, something moved in a way that suggested a knee. It was some part of presence rising to adjust to me. I felt stupid tears do what tears do, and then stop doing it because they are embarrassed on your behalf. I put down the comb. I stood. The coat stand creaked a little. The mirror took me, and then it didn't. I went to work like a person whose life is under the control of other languages. I held the scanner S small gun, and it beeped at each code that passed under its red, a disciplined little noise, and I blessed it for pretending to be happy. I signed the board for my shift hours, and the marker squeaked in the way that says the man in the office buys markers in packs of 12 and keeps them until they are too thin for the board to respect. The break room TV showed the weather, and a banner at the bottom reported the boil order would be extended because 3 neighborhoods still had low chlorine residuals. That phrase, said quickly, is like a line of poetry to make you accept a certain flavor in your mouth. One of the men made a joke about the river and his mother's liver, and one of the women said, "Shut up, Joe," not unkindly, and we continued. On the way home, I stopped at the hardware store because my apartment needed 2 more screw eyes to make the mirror more honest. The barcode beeps at the checkout were in a key that made me think of the stairwell. Standing at the counter, I caught myself in the small mirror they keep for the aisle of door handles, a cheat to show you how the brass will take you, and my face performed its duty. I stepped to the side, out of habit. The mirror let me vanish. The woman at the counter kept her eyes on the register like a good soldier. I should have gone to the clinic, to the priest, to my sister. I should have gone to a store of the sort that collects things once rejected and gives them a price. An authority who could tell me if a mirror can be taught, when to ignore and when to accept. I went home and wiped a ring from the counter and folded a towel into thirds and hung it, then took it down and hung it again, because the first time had a twist in it I could not forgive. I put the receipt from the hardware store under the little house and wrote in the corner of the paper where those receipts say cashier, the words witness wants ground. It was a note to myself to keep my feet still. It was a sentence that sounded like it belonged in someone else's mouth. By Saturday night, I was exhausted and had done nothing that could be recorded by a city, which is how I measure the parts of my days that I'd done to want to say out loud. I turned the mirror to face the wall because I am not incapable of gesture. I put the coat stand in the bedroom and shut the bedroom door. I stood in the kitchen and listened to the refrigerator work. I used my phone long enough to see that the city S site had updated the boil notice. I fed the cat, and the cat ignored me in the careful way cats teach you to appreciate. I stood in the hall in front of the turned mirror because that kind of stupidity is mine. I stepped forward and then back. I held my breath and then exhaled so I could not complain later that the air had not been told what I expected of it. At some hour that has no name except lonely, I woke in the living room and knew something was wrong, and then counted the wrongs like apportioning blame in a polite household. The traffic light had turned to a flashing red because the power had blinked and the town had let the light do its saving trick. The stairwell had gone quiet because the fluorescent had shut down for the night. The refrigerator held its breath between cycles. The apartment took my weight in a way that made me think of a wooden boat. I went down the hall like a person going to sit at the edge of a child's bed after a dream. The mirror had turned itself back. That is the sentence I must write, because that is the sentence that gets me to the next. I told myself I had not turned it true. I told myself I had hung it badly, and gravity does what it can when you aren't looking. I told myself I'll find the stand in a different place from where I left it, because I'm careless at night. I stood in front of the mirror and felt the air behind my neck tighten to the width of a hand. The runner offered me two shallow ovals, newer over older. I placed my feet inside them because I was too tired to be a brave animal. Morning. The mirror a mirror. My face, my mouth a mouth that should be kept safe, the fridge humming, the towel straight. The ring from last night wiped and the new ring allowed to dry a little because I wanted some history there. The city texted to say the substation work had been completed and thanked us for our understanding. The men in the warehouse greeted each other with a set of jokes they didn't change for the week because there are rituals in every place, and I think we are fools who do not love them. The barcode beep found its old confidence. The boxes lived and then moved. The traffic lights kept their meaning. If the mirror had come to me a century ago, I could have named it properly. There would be an order of words that I would know from pocket editions. It would be named for a saint or a girl. There would be a cure. It would be time and sand and the prayer of a woman who is told not to speak to the men about what happens in rooms. The mirror came to me now, and I live in a town where we have adopted slogans. Those slogans hang limp over the river and the cranes and the acres of metal in pallets when the wind is wrong. They say resilience in the sort of font that scolds a person who has done nothing. They say community and safe, and they mention sustainability when they need to persuade you that a thing that takes will one day give. I stood in front of the mirror and told myself a slogan. This is nothing to be frightened of. It didn't land anywhere. I began to avoid the hallway. I learned inconvenient routes through my own place like a man who has arranged to never pass the desk where he forgot to send a letter. To the kitchen through the front room. To the bedroom by the back door through the little junk porch. I wore a sweater I didn't like because the mirror had nothing to say about it. I slept with my feet at the opposite end of the couch because I couldn't bear waking up facing the hall. I ate less. I found myself thinking of the mirror at work and felt the scanner gun heavy in my hand and felt my pulse answer and then fail to answer. When I passed the big windows of the hardware place and caught myself in the glass, I stood for a half second to make sure the sidewalk would keep me. It escalated with small mercies. The mirror began to hold me when I hadn't given it anything to stand on. I took it as a kindness. I forgot the coat stand one morning and rushed out and caught my face as I always did and thought, 1, it's getting better, and 2, I'm an idiot. At lunch in the canteen, I took my phone out and looked at myself with the camera, and the camera did its work. In the late afternoon, I made a project of the bathroom mirror in the warehouse, and it spectacularly liked me. The mirror at home had learned when to pity me. I felt generous to the idea of science. It was a Sunday, the kind that makes a person walk slower because the river and the highway noises have decided to give up on you when I went to the hall with a cup of tea and stood there because I wanted to forgive it. The cup left a ring on the dresser where I set it, and I didn't wipe it because I wanted the moment to remain. The mirror took me like an old friend. I let my shoulders down. I lifted my chin. I did not know what to do with my hands. I smiled in a way that made me think of a school picture, and I wanted to apologize to it. The air behind me cooled by a degree. The draft told me something had entered. I did not turn. In the mirror, in that foxed corner, a darker grey gathered like a decision. The glass bleached my face and then returned it. The hair along my arm lifted, and I had the sensation of seeing myself from above, the way those maps with little blue dots put you in the world, and then you are a person again. My hallway knows how to make ordinary noises special. The upstairs neighbor's radio has a dial that doesn't grasp the concept of stations, so his music lives between 2 songs. The stairwell light has a chain pull that clangs against glass if you let it, so the men in the building learn to swing to avoid it. The river's smell makes its way to my kitchen when the wind remembers. The barcodes at the corner shop speak from inside the counter because the scanner sits under glass like a frog. The refrigerator compressor clicks in a way that contains the idea of fairness. In all of it, the mirror made a new noise, small as a person's breath when they give up on taking more in. A tiny static, the air around my head turning into radio. I raised my hand to touch the glass, and in the smear of foxing, I saw another hand rise in the same careful way a frightened person will let you know you are not alone, and will not allow you to use that information. Letters arrive in old towns because there are old men whose minds are in straight lines, and young women whose lives are counted on good days by how many things they can get to stay. Through the week, I got a notice from the city about scheduled valve replacement and how water might temporarily discolor and how this was normal. Another about the ferry's modified schedule because of high winds and low staff, and this was not normal but would feel like it soon. And then the favorite of public notices, which is not really a notice but a request. Please consolidate errands, energy conservation between 3 and 7. Stormwater reminders. I taped them to the refrigerator and pretended that if I lived among paper, I would be forgiven when the mirror finished instructing me. The lighthouse magnet felt heavy with all those words. The following afternoon, I tried to ignore it the way a person tries to ignore a cough in a quiet room. I failed and went into the hall. My reflection stood there, clean and honest. Behind my shoulder in the glass, something made of cold took its place, and the air of our 2 nest changed. I stepped to the side and my reflection followed me to the edge of the frame, a polite dance, then thinned so fast I felt chagrined. When I returned to the center, it returned like a habit you do not deserve yet rely on. I moved my head slightly. My reflection blinked out and back, as if something had taken a step and matched me, and the static sound rose a fraction, like a scanner seeking a band. That night, with the lights down, the hall was a black bar, and the mirror the end of it, and I wanted to walk and not walk. I got up for water and made myself keep a straight path. I set my bare feet inside the shallow ovals without seeing them. The air behind my neck went cool with the respect a room offers you when you are trying. I took one more step. The mirror let me walk out of myself until I was a blackout and the hall was everything. I stood with my hand on the wall to know where I was. When the refrigerator's compressor came on, the low click and then the hum, I felt an unearned gratitude to a thing I could plug in. When I returned to bed, the cat had taken my place. I let her decide how much of my life to give back. The next day, the warehouse clocked me in. Barcode beeps kept count. The men thought of their wrists. The women thought of their hips. The television said things to the break room because it doesn't like it when we talk to one another, and the supervisor called me into his office because my ID photo didn't show when the software lit up my screen. "It's the system," he said to be kind. He clicked the mouse twice and frowned at the small square in the corner of the program that holds your face like a stamp. The square showed a grey and a hint of a chair, and no me. "Happened with 3 others last month," he added, a solid and compassionate lie. "We took a new photo with the camera that sits on the edge of his desk and pretends work requires glamour. He had me sit on the stool and turn the light so I wouldn't squint, and he pressed the little button and the camera made its cheerful beep. The live view on the screen showed a blank chair. He looked at the camera, then at me, then into the air so as not to make me feel like an animal having a moment. "Hold up," he said. He called down the hall for someone to stand behind me. The someone standing behind me, the wiry nightpacker with a good laugh, made a friendly noise and put his hands in his pockets, and the screen stuttered, and then there I was, in the monitor, a colorless person. The supervisor whispered, "Huh?" Not to me, to the idea of things. We saved the photo. If he looked at me hard after, he didn't show it. On Tuesday, I went to renew my driver's license because it is one thing to be erased at work where men are polite and another thing to be erased by the city. I waited under the humming lights with other people who had learned how to sit without using their faces. I filled out the form with my neatest letters, the habit of school that insists a girl is a girl if she's careful, and placed the papers in the tray. When they called my number, I stepped up, and the woman at the counter made a face like the refrigerator starting. "Photo, please," she said, routine making her voice a well-worn place. I stood in front of the blue screen and put my shoulders where she told me, and tried to think of a thing that did not show in my eyes. The camera beeped, and the screen on her desk showed color confidence. The image in the corner showed nothing. She said, in that voice we have all learned was bred for difficult balance, "Let's try again." The second time the same. The third time she called someone over. A man with tidy hair looked at the camera, then at me, then turned and put his back to mine like a prom date, and the screen gave me back, not generously, but enough for a bureaucrat. "Run with it," he said. "The system's been glitching." He handed me a temporary printed on a paper warmer than his own hand. I walked home on Wren and counted green lights, because it is something to do when you have become a person the camera rejects. The corner of Pike had a lane closure, not serious, nothing that would keep anyone from their place, but every driver pretended to be lost in a manner that suggested other losses. I stopped at the grocery because the house needed dish soap and for no other reason, and the barcode beeps calmed me as if I had found a station on the radio at last. The woman at the register said hello without saying my name, like a kindness. I held the bottle of soap up to the security mirror that gives you back a fisheye of your shame, and saw what I always see: an arm, a woman, a bottle of dish soap, a choice. The mirror at home had less patience for me that night, and I wanted passionately to trade mirrors with the grocery and never explain to either. I started to stand in the hall for longer because I wanted to feel the witness settle behind me, and I wanted to be sure it was not a fear I had invented to stay company with myself. If I stood for 5 minutes or 10, my legs went heavy and then lighter, and my breath found a set of rules it can obey and not be mocked for. The mirror did what it did. The foxing made stars and then clouds and then a hole in what I thought was my face. The air behind my neck moved on days when the window in the bedroom was shut tight and the weather saw nothing to do with me. The shallow ovals in the runner darkened a little with wear, and then pale, and then darkened again where my own heels had drawn something out of the pattern. When I dreamed, the dream did not try to make the mirror into a murderer and my reflection into a girl. It presented what it had, a long hall that belonged to someone who took pride in paint that can be cleaned, a mirror at the end, ovals at the feet. I dreamed the exact sounds, the refrigerator's compressor click, the distant siren's long note paler at the end, the stairwell light's valiant hum, the upstairs neighbor, S radio, S static. And I woke thinking I was still in the dream, because that is the trick of making honest sounds regular. The boil order lifted, then returned, then didn't, depending on what street I stood on. The city put out a map that made my block a different color than my sister's, which made me furious about geography and siblinghood for an hour, a petty and honest hour. The ferry cancelled a quarter its runs because of wind, because of staff, because of the remembered accident 10 years ago when a man who had spent his life making good times of other people, took his eyes from his hands. The warehouse printed new stickers for shipping that said fuel surcharge review and tucked them into the corner of the new world. On Wednesday, the supervisor asked for volunteers for Saturday because the schedule thought we knew what a weekend was. Days took a shape I could stand inside if I kept my arms to my sides. Morning, the mirror took me kindly if I set the coat stand just so. Noon, at work, the scanner did its gentle beep and the conveyor belts tried to follow a schedule and sometimes succeeded. Evening, the hall belonged to whoever would stand there, and I went and stood and tried to keep my calves from betraying me. Night, the refrigerator's hum was the nearest thing I owned that could be called a lullaby. I washed the towels the woman had called clean and hung one over the oven handle to dry and patted it on the way to bed without knowing I was touching it, as if to thank it. I let the mug S-ring live on the counter through a whole day and took it up in the next as if I needed proof I had lived inside that day. On Thursday, I found a printed receipt under the runner, despite my habit of keeping the runner tacked down at the corners with tape, because a runner that travels will show you who you are to your house. The receipt, creased as if someone had folded it and unfolded it carefully, was from a hardware shop across the river where I had not been in months. 9 feet of chain, picture hangers, a little tube of adhesive for the back of the mirror, paid in cash. I do not use cash because I am a person who likes to be able to search my own life by month later and reduce it to categories. The paper had my name at the top. I have given my name to receipts so many times I cannot permit myself to say the receipt had been wrong. The runner had 2 new shallow ovals pressing up against what could be either the bottom of a coat stand or the narrow feet of a person who had learned to stand still. What does a person do then? I sat on the floor with the receipt and brought it to my nose and smelled the ghost of the shop's hand soap and the pencils they keep by the broken door. The fridge clicked alive behind me. The traffic light at Wren and Pike counted like a choir learning a line. I lay the receipt on the floor and put my palm over my name so that I could be allowed to occupy my name where it was printed. I put the other hand into one of the shallow ovals and pressed until my fingers hurt, and the runner. Being a runner gave me its fabric and its dirt, and the lesson of not being concerned about any particular human longing. The distance between the day and the night shortened like a train schedule without comment. I lost weight and pretended not to notice. I woke in that way you wake when you have stood too long in one pose and your spine says words you know. I ate standing up because if I sat, my body thought it had, because we are trained by rooms. I spoke to the cat, and the cat's tail did the little curve that saves a woman from too much sadness. I wrote in my notebook, not sentences, just pairs of words: stand still, be seen, the witness, leave me. I meant to take the mirror down when I passed the kitchen on my way to bed, then meant to do it in the morning. I meant to. I stood at the edge of the bed, and then at the edge of the hall, and then at the edge of my own body. On the second Sunday, 2 weeks after I hung the mirror, my sister called, which is her skill. She called because she had baked a bread that rose the way she liked, and because the ferries were going and the sky had been patient with brickwork all day. She wanted me to say a word. I told her about the valve work and the warehouse and the 2 potted plants I was not killing yet. I told her I had bought a towel with a pattern I would never have allowed 10 years ago. I didn't tell her that a mirror had begun to admit me only when a presence behind me decided to be there. I told her I was all right, and then I said I was tired, and she said the same. And we left the call with the usual promise: it will be easier when the days grow, which is a promise made to children, not to us, but it is the only one I can say to a person I do not want to scare. That night the mirror gave me a thing I had not asked for and cannot be blamed for, and own anyway. I stood with my shoulders placed the way the DMV man had asked for, and I called it good enough. The draft came. I felt it take its place. I read the air. The static rose and then fell. In the glass behind me, the foxing softened into something like breath. The presence, my witness, my requirement, leaned nearer, if such a thing can lean, and my face blurred and then steadied. I lifted my hand. My reflection lifted hers. Behind her, in the shift shine of the fox, something like a chin dipped a little toward a chest, then turned away. I did not turn. I did not breathe. I learned then that I had decided the witness was a thing without a face, because I could not bear a face. It may have had one. If it did, it decided that I was the one who should not see it. It was the first time I thought of the whole thing as fair. On Monday, the city declared the boil order rescinded. On Tuesday, I ran water from the tap into a glass and set the glass on the counter, and the water was fine, and the light went through it, and my kitchen looked like a place where someone could throw parties, and I did not think of the mirror. On Wednesday, I washed the runner and hung it over the back of the chair to dry, and 2 oval patches dried last. I pressed my fingers into them and pretended not to have an opinion about what it meant. On Thursday, I bought a new towel and hung it on the oven handle, and the towel S pattern, that little chevron, made me feel like a person who could stand in the world and count for something. On Friday at work, the scanner's battery failed at 11 and came back at 2. So for 3 hours, I packed boxes under a silence I had not agreed to and listened for the mirror. I went home early because the supervisor had learned to say yes to things a woman asks for without requiring a story. I stopped at the grocery for eggs and coffee and fruit I would not eat. At the register, the barcode beeps were the one thing in my day I wanted to sing along with. On the way out, I caught myself in the black glass of the freezer with its stern little lock and saw my hand and the eggs and nothing else. When I shifted an inch, my face came into view. A man behind me in line changed feet and my face vanished again. I got home and opened the refrigerator and put the eggs on the shelf and listened to the compressor start as if it were a person I could thank. Saturday morning I woke with the surety a person has before they pick up a child. The muscles promise that if the child falls backward, you will be the heir. I carried the coat stand to the front room and left it. I poured water. I wiped the mug ring. I straightened the towel and did not straighten it, then did. I stood in front of the mirror with nothing behind me but the air of my house, which was also another person's house and another over time. I watched the glass. The face came. Mine. Plain. I smiled and was punished for it. The smile turned me into a person who looks better when serious. The draft came, cool and civil. The presence took its place. At my feet, the runner did its loyal work. I stood until the calves shook. I stood until the cat came and laced my ankles and then went still when she reached that same thin river of air behind me. I stood until the refrigerator turned on, and I loved it again. I stood until the stairwell light down the hall hummed. I stood and the mirror held me because something else had chosen to stand. I thought then that this was the rest of my life. It felt less horrifying than you might think, in the way all habits that protect a person from deciding are not so bad. I would be a woman who stands, and in standing, appears. I would schedule it. Morning 5 minutes, night 10. I would move in my house by the routes that kept me out of the hall when the witness had other obligations. I would go to work and the scanner would beep and the conveyor belts would talk to themselves in long rubber sentences and the men would laugh and the women would lift. I would set the runner by the window and brush it and lay it back. I would bring the mirror lemon oil like a meek offering to a stubborn friend. I would write things on the backs of receipts and slide them under the ceramic house. I would wear a sweater my sister said was too nice to keep at the warehouse. I would tell no one a sentence that sounded like a bad translation. That plan held for a week, and then, as careful plans do, it broke because of things that were not about me, and one that was. The city's server went down, and a woman on the radio did a careful thing with her voice to tell us that permits, services and appointments might be postponed. The grocery ES register refused to acknowledge barcodes for 2 hours, and the manager had to improvise in front of a group of people who had worked with him for 10 years and still enjoyed watching him sweat. In our building, a letter went under doors asking tenants to use water mindfully while the contractor examined a weeping pipe in the basement. A floor that swells, it said, affects everyone. The ferry cancelled 2 runs for a Boat S exhaust issue and then tried to make it up to us by running at half-hour intervals and confusing every person who can read a chart. The stairwell light went entirely and a man put a lamp on the landing with a note asking people to unplug it when they went to bed, as if the building had parents. I caught a cold that warmed my ears and loosened the kind of sigh people ask about. I stood with a towel over my head above a bowl and breathed eucalyptus, because plants may not help, but this is choosing, and I am a person who would make this choice every time. The mirror grew patient, or I did, with our condition. I stood in the hall with the towel still hanging off one shoulder and thought, well, this is my life, and the mirror agreed. When the stairwell was dark, I brought a flashlight and did my passage like a person whose wrist is honest about its age. At night, the refrigerator became a lull in the static of the neighbor's radio. In the morning, the cat forgave me. The thing that rearranged everything should not have. It was a photograph. The warehouse had a new safety program, and the supervisor, who had a sister who designs programs for new things, asked us to take a group photo for the bulletin, a bulletin no one reads. We collected by the loading dock. The man who owns a tripod put his camera on it because he is never off duty in that respect. We arranged ourselves in a comedy of heights. Tall men asked to hunch. Short women asked to take the front in a false chivalry. I took my place with the others. I do not love being made to be with people who know only my name and the way my elbow moves a box. But I can be respectful. The camera's timer counted its blinks. The red light made a small song. We stood because we were asked. The image printed in the supervisor AS office about an hour later, and he pinned it to the board with the new markers he had bought that morning in penance, and we all stopped in pairs to look. Everyone else in Department 4 looked like a person who is asked to stand still on a Thursday morning. Where I stood was a gap. The men on my left and right turned a little toward something they must have thought was me because their bodies remembered I had been there. The camera had drawn a shape of air between the arms I know as Dan and Elise, and the shape was mine. The joke lasted an appropriate minute because in a warehouse, if you want to keep kindness, you give it a thin coat of mean. Then the men and women learned to look at me and not at the board, and my throat went hot, and I said, to the air and to the man in the office and to myself, "It's broken." The man behind me looked at me with his mouth doing a thing that was either sympathy or not. He said nothing. At home, I took the photograph I had printed weeks ago and put it next to the group photo and found both unblessed in the same way. I put them under the lighthouse magnet because the lighthouse likes to have more to do. I went to the hall and stood and made the mirror say what it would. I stood until night and until morning and until the morning after that. I moved the coat stand to the bedroom and then back to teach myself I was in charge of the standing. The mirror accepted me and then denied me in patterns I could predict only if I admitted I was thinking of a face behind me that I could not see. On Monday, the city sent an email that began, "We appreciate your patience during recent outages." Dean, it felt like getting a letter from an aunt you like very much, who has always worked to make sentences march correctly. I printed it, which I rarely do. I put it under the lighthouse magnet. The magnet filled with words. My refrigerator hummed its loyal sound. The stairwell light gave up until a man across the hall bought a new tube and installed it with the dignity of a person who has decided to add to the tally of helpful men that day. The traffic light at Pike and Wren did a little glitch that I've only ever seen twice, a longer yellow that made everyone doubt the color green afterward. The ferry's horn sounded at times that did not match the tideboard. A siren took itself down Wren with the confidence of a letter. On a Wednesday I came home and went straight to the mirror because the midday had been a muddle and I needed to be arranged by a surface. I stood and the mirror answered me. In the foxing at the bottom left, I saw a shape like the side of a face, and I allowed myself to think the word jaw. The witness behind me kept its density. I had the thought a person has in houses. If I stand here long enough, if I speak enough small, gentle words into the air that I do not believe in but have taught myself something, will become something else. It was a child's thought and it helped me. That night I heard static in the hall again, not radio static, not the upstairs set between stations. A smaller sound, the whisper of circuits making decisions. I stood, the refrigerator turned to its louder hum, and the noise folded itself into the tone. The stairwell light hummed, and the noise did the same. Noise, when you stack it, becomes mercy. A siren climbed the block and turned at the alley, and someone got help. The cat yawned like a person imitating a cat. I waited. The mirror gave me a general permission. I said nothing. I held a towel in my hands and turned it once, and then set it back on the oven handle. There are things I will not write, because they will look like needing the mirror to be a certain kind of story. One of them is that when I am in front of it, and the witness stands behind me and breathes the air that I have made into air by being there, I feel taller. I close my mouth and think a quieter thought. I feel some part of me a small way to the side and back, and that part is too honest to be me. When the mirror lets me go, that part remains a bit behind my shoulder until I turn the first corner of my house, and then it politely departs. It is not a power. I have none. It is something like the way you feel after a person hands you a paper that says, "This belongs to you." And you know that belonging is a choice made by a bored person in an office. It feels false, and it feels official, and it will let you buy bread without being looked at. Then the one day came in that week, when patterns, kindly when repeated, become a schedule, and the schedule confesses itself and breaks. I stood in the hall with nothing in my hands and remembered my first day in the apartment when I saw the river street through the front window and thought I could learn this. The mirror took my face but left my eyes, a trick it had never bothered with before. Behind me, a cold moved with the good manners of an older man. I felt a gaze on the part of my neck where I have always forgotten to put sunscreen. In the glass, behind me, a figure leaned a half-inch as if to see my face better. I moved a half-inch to starboard. The figure moved with me, not to my place, but to stand, as he had decided to stand. He? I have written it. I am ashamed of writing it, because I have no knowledge, and I have always been a person who mined their own knowledge. It does not matter. He leaned. I kept my shoulders square. He leaned more. The glass chilled the way the back of a wrist does in a hospital. I looked where my eyes should be and saw those pale moons of foxing meet to make a constellation that is loved by no one. The static grew. Something moved on the runner behind me and made no sound, a slow weight coming up to the backs of my heels, like a person who doesn't want to wake another. I stood as a person will stand when they believe that their standing is all they have been asked for, and what will be asked later will be asked gently. In the glass, my mouth opened a little. In the glass, behind me, the suggestion of a face tilted the way the head of a person tilts when they are trying to hear whether the river is still moving in the dark. The day after, work asked me to open the old lot because the new one S-gate had lost power and my key is to the old don't worry. I went up the stairs to the office for the old lot, sleeves rolled and the stairwell light sang under my skull. The office had been used as a place for boxes to await decision. I turned the lamp with the chain pull, and the chain clanged the glass, the sound of the cheap children's desk lamps that taught me how to sit. I checked the switchboard like the supervisor had taught me, even though none of us had believed a single thing we were told that day. I opened the gate, and the lot breathed out. Across the street, the traffic light swung yellow. It held longer than it should have, and I saw two drivers move too soon because expectation is heavier than law. I stood at the window and, without thinking, used it as a mirror, the way we all do in these moments, to say to our faces, whatever the system will not. The window liked me until an old man came up the sidewalk to wait for the bus. He placed his feet apart and set his bag down the way an old man does when he wants to carry something that is not his history. In the window, my face thinned and then left. I had to applaud the economy of it. He stood, and so I could be. He stepped, and I was nothing. I went home out of energy for speech. I passed the community board in the lobby where the landlord had taped a notice about the boiler, and the heavy feet of that notice, "Boiler service Tuesday please plan," made me forgive everyone who had ever sold me a night quick when I needed to be slow. I went upstairs. I set my hand on the banister, the way a person for whom the house has never failed him will. I put my grocery bag on the counter and let the eggs and the bread be more themselves than I felt. The mirror's run began in my chest. I went down the hall and stood, and the mirror did its plain work, and the witness did his, and my face was my face. I raised my hand. In the glass, I saw it lift. Behind me, the figure made a barely decision, head to the left an inch, the way a person says, "I will not interrupt you." I could have taken the mirror down. I could have moved. I could have told my sister. I could have told a priest, a supervisor, a careful woman with paperwork to make me a person. I didn't. I stood and felt the shape of my belonging in that room. I stood until night filled itself. I stood until the refrigerator cut its hum and went quiet, and I felt my house that minute like a boat cutting its engine 50 feet from the dock. I stood until 2 and then slept in my place in the hall. The end of the story is not spectacular. It comes the way a building gives up on its stairwell light, with a tiny mule and a promise to return. One night, with wind off the river, I stood in the hall and felt nothing behind me, and then felt it fully. A narrow drafting, the presence as real as a hand. The mirror took me and left me. It refused me and then calmly took me because I had stayed long enough to satisfy it. The static rose. The witness leaned nearer in the foxing. I'd planned to say a word then, the words we say in houses when we ask for a face. I didn't. The mirror made a new line across my mouth, the way silver will show you are older than you thought, when all you did was buy a towel with a pattern to make it nicer. I said a word anyway, stay. It left my body without my consent. The presence stopped. The mirror warmed at the edge the way a person S-hand will when they have held it against a window too long. I thought of names. Miriam, my sister, a face from a bus, Dad with his end-of-week shoulders, and hated myself with a good old hatred. My body learned then exactly what it would cost to have a face. The calves shook. The lower back wrote a letter. The heels became hollows. The feet sank into the runner's pattern. The refrigerator hummed like a person sleeping beside you with good lungs. The stairwell light went, came, went. The traffic light wrote code on the wall. The cat would not enter the hall. The face in the foxing made a small angle, then stayed, then faded until the silver took it whole. I stayed because I had said the word. I stayed until I felt my own breath change to suit the hall. I stayed until the shallow ovals under my heels became deep ones. I stayed until the mirror did not require the coat stand, the ladder, the broom, the chair, a person at work standing behind me, a man at a bus stop, a window that loves a woman. It required me. I became the person the mirror needed to make the woman in it into me. I knew the end would be quiet. All the sounds I love teach me to expect it. The refrigerator's compressor starting and stopping without permission. The stairwell light's nerve. The traffic light's law. The siren's apology. The hose water through old pipes learning the shape of the house and keeping it. The barcode beeps in the stores, telling you things are alive enough to count themselves. The tide board IS diamonds arranged in sheets of paper, men taped to walls to get through a day. The mug ring, the towel, the receipts under the lighthouse magnet, the way our bodies give their heat to glass, and we congratulate ourselves when anything returns it. In the morning, I found the coat stand where I had not put it, in the bedroom at the end of the bed. I found the photograph under the magnet curled so far its corners had touched themselves. I found the runner smooth and clean, except for two ovals near the mirror, so neat I could have chalked them. I put my feet inside them and felt the mirror soften me in the generous way of a room that has decided you may belong to it if you would only learn to stand still. I write this now, not out of an abundance, not because I prefer the letter form to the way things live inside air, but because there is a message to send to the part of the world that will move through my hallway when I am done. I cannot bring myself to cut the mirror out of its frame. I cannot give it to someone who will use it to check their hair before a funeral. I cannot break it without asking the house to keep the light. I will stand until the mirror is done with me, and the witness has learned whatever my small body could have told it about wait and patience and wanting. The mirror is true enough to give me back to the people who have learned to require me. The camera will not, the windows on Pike will not. I will be the person I can be, in front of a surface that demands feet. And when I am not, when someone comes up the stairwell with a box and hears the hum and the chain of the light and sees the traffic light put a small square of green on the hallway, and when they put one hand on the banister and one on the key and turn the brass and step into this apartment, I hope they will do the one right thing I can ask. Do not turn quickly. Do not call a name into a space that did not give it. Do not cover the mirror with a towel like a decent woman with a piano in a room too small for it. Stand. Let the air behind your neck cool. Watch the glass until the silver accepts whatever it will accept and take it as a kindness. If you must speak, speak like a person who has learned to force the words through a surface that will not validate them. You may see yourself, you may not. You may see a woman about my age whose face is a plan the glass keeps revising. You may see nothing but your own hallway, your own shade of paint surrendered to high corners and left there as a badge. Whatever the mirror offers, do not pivot on your heel to face what you have never learned to be. Give me this. Let me stand behind your shoulder and pass. Let me train you in the one good habit I could afford. Hold still, then go boil a kettle because the city says you do not have to anymore. But it will make you feel like you have earned the water. Wipe the ring or do not. Fold the towel wrong and leave it. Take the receipt from your pocket and write a sentence on the back and slide it under the little house if you have one. You'll hear the refrigerator make its dignified sound. You'll hear the stairwell light ask for a new tube. You'll hear the hallway breathe in its precise way, the way halls do when they have taught someone to live with them. And when you take your first step back down the hall, your soles will find the places where I stood, and you will press them once with your heels, like a person saying yes to a dance they cannot see.